The night I packed my last suitcase, I left one envelope on the kitchen table, thin, unassuming, and powerful enough to make my sister scream, "You're joking," when she finally opened it. I didn't hear the scream myself. I was already gone by then. But I imagined it clearly, because for 26 years, I had been invisible in that house, and that letter was the first time my absence would be impossible to ignore. My name is Lily, the older daughter, though you'd never guess it by the way my parents treated us. In our family, age meant nothing. Only preference did. And my younger sister Sarah had been their chosen one since the day she was born. Sarah was the miracle child, the one my parents prayed for after a difficult pregnancy. She grew up wrapped in praise, excuses, and second chances. I grew up learning how to stay quiet, how to move aside, how to swallow disappointment without making a sound. When Sarah forgot her responsibilities, I was expected to cover for her. When she failed an exam, my parents blamed the stress I caused her. When she wanted something, my room, my savings, my time, it was never a request. It was an expectation, reinforced by my parents' tired refrain, "Be understanding. She's sensitive." The moment that finally broke me came 3 weeks ago. Our parents called a family meeting, their serious voices making my stomach twist with hope I should have known better than to feel. They announced they were selling the house my grandmother had left to both of us, and giving the entire proceeds to Sarah so she could start her life properly. I remember staring at them, waiting for the punchline. It never came. When I asked what I was supposed to do, my mother didn't even look ashamed. "You're strong," she said. "You'll manage." That was the night something inside me went very, very quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't fight. Instead, I started planning. I smiled when Sarah bragged about her future. I nodded when my parents talked about sacrifice and family unity. All the while, I gathered documents, memories, and truths no one thought I'd ever dare to use. And when the day came for me to leave, I made sure I left properly. One letter. My name written neatly at the bottom. Her name at the top. As I closed the door behind me, I felt it, an unsettling certainty that the family who never chose me was about to wish they had asked why I left so quietly. Because people should always be afraid of the sister who stops explaining. I thought leaving would bring silence. Instead, it brought clarity. The first red flag came 2 days after I moved into my tiny studio apartment. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother, not to ask if I was safe, not to see how I was settling in, but to remind me to forward the electricity bill from the old house. "Your father can't find it," she wrote. Even after I was gone, I was still expected to carry weight that was no longer mine. Later that same night, Sarah called me. Her voice was unusually sweet, almost rehearsed. She asked how I was, whether I was adjusting, and then casually slipped in the real reason for her call. She needed the login details for a savings account we once shared, an account I had quietly stopped contributing to years ago, when I realized every withdrawal went to her needs. When I hesitated, she laughed. "Relax, Lily. Mom and Dad said it's fine. They always did." That's when I started noticing the pattern I had been trained not to question. My parents' calls became shorter, colder. They avoided specifics, spoke in half sentences, and always ended the conversation quickly, as if someone else was in the room with them. Once, when I asked my father about the house sale timeline, there was a long pause. I heard muffled voices in the background before he answered, too smoothly, "Everything's under control." Another pause. Then the line went dead. A week later, I received an email from the bank. It was a mistake, they said. A system error. But it showed a large transfer request under my name, one I had never authorized. When I confronted my parents, my mother sounded offended, not concerned. "Why are you being so dramatic?" she snapped. "Sarah is handling things for the family now." Handling things. Using my identity. Spending money I didn't even know was still connected to me. Still, no one admitted anything outright. That was the most unsettling part. Every lie was wrapped in warmth. Every excuse sounded reasonable, if you didn't listen too closely. The emotional weight began to show in ways I couldn't hide. I stopped sleeping through the night. I replayed conversations, dissected tone changes, searched for the moment I had missed when the lines were crossed without my permission. I told myself I was imagining it, that years of resentment were coloring everything. But my body knew the truth before my mind accepted it. My hands shook whenever my phone rang. My chest tightened when I saw my sister's name on the screen. I started keeping a folder, screenshots, emails, old messages, not because I was planning anything, but because something deep inside whispered that I might need them. One evening, while sorting through old documents, I found a scanned copy of my grandmother's handwritten will. There was a note in the margin I didn't remember reading before. It wasn't addressed to Sarah. It was addressed to me. And suddenly, I understood why everyone was being so careful with their words, and why my sister had started calling me so often. The note in my grandmother's will kept me awake all night. It was written in her familiar, slanted handwriting, squeezed into the margin, as if she'd known someone might try to erase it later. "Lily is to receive my share directly. Do not let them change this. My share. Not our share. Not Sarah's. Mine." By morning, disbelief had hardened into something sharp and burning. I needed answers, not half-truths wrapped in comfort. So I did something I hadn't done since I moved out. I went back to the house. The front door opened before I knocked. Sarah stood there, already smiling, until she saw what I was holding. The faded envelope. The scanned will. Her smile froze. Inside, my parents sat at the dining table like they were waiting for a storm to pass. I laid the papers down between us, my hands trembling despite every effort to stay calm. "Why does this say the inheritance was meant for me?" I asked. Silence. Then my mother sighed, tired and irritated, as if I were the inconvenience. "That document is outdated," she said. "Your grandmother didn't understand how things would turn out." I turned to my father. "You sold the house." "We had to," he replied quickly. "Sarah needs stability. You're independent." Independent. The word felt like a slap. Sarah finally spoke, folding her arms. "You weren't even here anymore, Lily. What were we supposed to do, wait for you to come back?" That's when the truth spilled out, not in one dramatic confession, but in fragments they thought were harmless. They had met with a lawyer months ago, without me. They had transferred the property under Sarah's name before the sale. They had used my signature from old documents to speed things up. Temporary, they claimed. Necessary. For the family. Forgery. The room tilted. I felt something tear inside my chest, not loudly, not cleanly, but slowly, like fabric giving way under too much strain. These were the people who taught me right from wrong, who warned me never to lie, never to steal. And yet, they had done both. To me. I wanted to scream. Instead, I laughed, a short, broken sound that surprised even me. "You stole from me," I said, my voice barely steady. "You planned it. All of you." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. It's just money. Just money." I left without another word. I walked until my legs ached, until the city lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. Rage followed me home, heavy and relentless. Not just at them, but at myself, for trusting so completely, for believing love would protect me. That night, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it simply, Evidence. Because if they thought I would disappear quietly, they had no idea what I was capable of becoming. I sat on the edge of my small apartment bed, staring at the folder labeled Evidence. The room was silent, but inside me, a storm raged. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of betrayal, the shock, the heartbreak, the suffocating sense of being utterly invisible to the family who was supposed to love me. But then something shifted. I remembered the nights I had stayed awake, watching Sarah and my parents manipulate every situation, always protecting her, always overlooking my existence. I remembered the will, my grandmother's handwriting screaming the truth I had ignored for too long. And I realized something that hit me harder than their deceit ever could. They were wrong if they thought this would break me. I had been taught to survive quietly, to swallow disappointment and move on. But survival isn't enough anymore. I didn't want to survive, I wanted justice. I wanted them to see me, the real me, the one they had tried to erase. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of emails, bank transfers, signed documents, even photographs showing my contributions and my grandmother's notes. Every piece of proof, meticulously gathered, reminded me that I had power. I wasn't helpless. I was invisible only because I had let them make me invisible. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the rush of clarity. The betrayal that had paralyzed me was now fueling me. The anger in my chest turned cold and precise. I could use it. I would use it. I remembered a phrase my grandmother had once whispered to me when I was a child, sitting on the old swing in the backyard. Lily, never let anyone write your story for you. I had spent years letting others define me, my sister, my parents, but that ended now. I stood up, pacing the room, every thought sharpening. I wasn't just going to confront them emotionally. I was going to reclaim what was mine. Every unfair decision, every stolen opportunity, every lie they told, they had underestimated me. An underestimation is a dangerous mistake. I made a plan, silently, step by step. First, I would secure legal advice. Then, I would gather the rest of the proof hidden in plain sight. Finally, I would confront them, not in anger, but in a way that would leave no room for denial. For the first time, the fear that had haunted me was gone. In its place was determination, so vivid it tingled in my veins. Betrayal had been their weapon, but now, it was my trigger. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks, but differently. Not peaceful. Not naive. Alert. Ready. Because tomorrow, I would stop being the girl they ignored, and start being the force they never saw coming. Lily was no longer the silent victim. She was becoming a storm. I didn't rush. That was the first rule I set for myself. People who act in anger make mistakes, and my family had already proven they were experts at covering theirs. If I wanted the truth to matter, I had to be precise, calm where they were careless, patient where they were arrogant. Step 1 was confirmation. I booked a consultation with a property lawyer under a false pretense, bringing copies of my grandmother's will, the sale documents, and the bank notice that had started everything. He didn't need long. His jaw tightened as he read, then he looked up at me and said the word I'd been expecting. Forgery. Hearing it out loud was like a switch flipping. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a crime. Step 2 was documentation. I stopped answering calls immediately. Instead, I responded only through messages and emails, always polite, always cooperative. I asked innocent questions I already knew the answers to, about the sale, the timeline, the lawyer they used. Each response was another thread they tangled themselves in. Dates didn't match. Explanations shifted. Sarah contradicted my parents without realizing it. I saved everything. Step 3 was observation. I learned quickly that Sarah loved feeling in control. She started calling again, casually bragging about renovations, about trips she was planning with her money. She slipped up when she felt safe. Mentioned meetings she assumed I knew about. Spoke too freely when she thought I was still the quiet sister who would never fight back. I let her believe that. Whenever she asked if I was okay, I told her I was tired. Confused. Still processing. Her voice softened every time, confidence growing. She had no idea that every word she spoke was becoming evidence. Step 4 was the trap. I hinted, carefully, that I was thinking of letting it go. That maybe my grandmother had changed her mind. That maybe the stress wasn't worth it. I even apologized once, saying I didn't want to tear the family apart. My mother cried with relief. My father told me he was proud of my maturity. Sarah laughed and said, "See? I knew you'd come around." That's when I knew they were ready. Behind the scenes, I filed a formal request for the original will and the lawyer's records. I contacted the bank about identity misuse. Quiet moves. Invisible ones. The kind that don't announce themselves until it's too late. The tension built slowly, like a held breath. They were celebrating. Planning a future that rested on my silence. And I was preparing to take everything back, not with shouting or tears, but with the truth laid out so clearly that denial would be impossible. They still thought they were in control. That was the most dangerous part for them. Because the moment someone underestimates you is the moment you decide exactly how hard they're going to fall. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension, a scent I had come to associate with inevitability. My family sat on the other side of the room, their expressions carefully neutral, or so they thought. Sarah's smile faltered the moment the clerk called my name. I walked to the front, my folder in hand, every step measured, every heartbeat steady. This was the moment years of silence, humiliation, and stolen inheritance had led to. The lawyer I had hired presented the evidence methodically, copies of the original will, the forged sale documents, and my grandmother's clear instructions. Emails, messages, and recorded conversations corroborated the timeline of deceit. Step by step, the story unfolded, not as accusation, but as undeniable fact. My mother shifted in her seat. My father's jaw tightened. And Sarah's face went pale. She hadn't realized how much she had confessed in casual calls and careless boasting. Every lie, every manipulation, every "just money" comment was now part of the record. When my lawyer looked at the judge and said, "The defendant used the plaintiff's signature without authorization to transfer property and unlawfully claim assets," I felt a thrill, a cold, sharp satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge fantasies and everything to do with justice finally landing. My parents tried to interject, to explain, to charm the court, but the proof was too precise, too organized, too undeniable. The judge raised a hand, silencing them, and the room went quiet except for the shuffle of papers. Sarah's first tear came when the verdict was read. The property transfer was void, the stolen funds were to be returned, and legal action would follow for forgery and financial misconduct. "Lily," the judge said, looking directly at me, "the court recognizes your claim as legitimate. The inheritance, as your grandmother intended, is yours." The words echoed in my ears, a symphony of vindication. My parents were silent, their arrogance shattered. Sarah sat frozen, her earlier confidence crumbling. I could almost hear her thoughts, though she didn't speak them. I underestimated her. I thought she would disappear. I thought she wouldn't fight. I stood, my hands steady, and met their eyes. There was no gloating, no unnecessary cruelty. Just truth. Later, outside the courtroom, reporters asked questions, snapping photos. Every word I spoke was deliberate, every glance calculated. The story of deceit, favoritism, and betrayal would be told, not in whispers behind closed doors, but in headlines and court records. Saar avoided me, my parents barely looked up. They had tried to erase me, to silence me, but now, the world saw what they had done. As I walked away from the courthouse, the weight that had crushed me for decades lifted. I hadn't just reclaimed what was mine. I had exposed their lies, revealed their favoritism, and reminded them, and everyone else, that betrayal always carries a price. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: peace. The sister they had underestimated had finally become the force no one could ignore. The storm I had been quietly building had arrived. The weeks after the courtroom battle were quiet, but sharp. My parents avoided calls, blocked numbers, and tried to rebuild their fragile reputation among friends who had once admired them blindly. Saar moved out of the house she had tried to claim as hers and struggled to adjust to a life where no one bowed to her whims. Every step she took reminded her of the price of underestimating someone she thought would stay silent. I, on the other hand, felt lighter than I had in decades. The inheritance was legally mine now, but more than that, my dignity, my voice, and my sense of self-worth were restored. I bought my own little house, not a mansion, not a trophy, but a space that was mine alone, free from favoritism, manipulation, and the shadows of a family that once erased me. Friends and strangers alike reached out after the story went public. They shared their own tales of betrayal, siblings, parents, colleagues, and I listened, offering encouragement and reminding them, as I had reminded myself, that silence only empowers the betrayer. I realized that revenge wasn't just about taking back what was stolen. It was about reclaiming the life you were always meant to have. Even Saar eventually called me, hesitantly, remorsefully. She didn't apologize outright. She couldn't. But she acknowledged the truth, finally admitting that she had been complicit, that our parents' favoritism had blinded her to my humanity. I listened. I forgave quietly, not for her sake, but for mine. The anger that had once consumed me was gone, replaced by clarity. I was no longer a victim, no longer defined by their choices. As I sit here now, in a home filled with my own choices, I can feel the weight of justice settling into place. The people who once thought they could manipulate fate, who tried to steal my legacy and silence my voice, are powerless now. Their arrogance is gone. Their schemes exposed. Their lesson learned too late. And to anyone watching this story unfold, have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved, someone you trusted? Did you find the strength to rise above it? Or are you still hiding in the shadows of their favoritism? Share your story in the comments below. Let's remind the world that betrayal can be overcome, and that justice, when executed with patience and precision, is unstoppable. If you want more stories of hidden strength, revenge, and poetic justice, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who rewrites the ending. And remember this: the sister they tried to erase didn't just return, she became the storm that left them wishing they had never underestimated her.